Hi everyone, and welcome to the October 30th edition of the VolunteerMatch Solutions Best Practice Network webinar. I'm Casey Brennan from VolunteerMatch and will be moderating the session today. Today's session is going to focus on one of the toughest challenges we face in corporate social responsibility, which is changing the behavior of our audiences. More specifically, we're going to be looking at what brands can do to influence consumer behavior change to encourage more sustainable social good over time. To walk us through this concept and its solutions, we have Dave Willans of Futerra Sustainability Communications, which is a UK-based firm that recently published a study entitled Planet Brands. The study looked at the brands with the most potential to influence consumer behavior and will offer all of us advice for how to change the behaviors of our audience. So we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session today, and you can do this in two ways. First, you can submit it through the question box on the right-hand side of your screen using the GoToWebinar dashboard. And you can also submit questions to us via Twitter, sending those to @VM_solutions using the hashtag VMVPN. We'll get to as many of your questions as possible at the end of the session. And just as a reminder to everyone on the line, we will be distributing a copy of the slides and the recording of this session to you after the fact. So without further delay, I'm going to pass the session over to Dave. So welcome, Dave.
Hello. Thank you very much, Casey. Okay, let me just get the presentation up and live.
Great.
Okay, that should be working. Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay, so as Casey was saying, we're going to talk about the Planet Brands research that we did here at Futerra, but also the point behind that was very much to look at how brands can drive consumer behaviour change. And now there's a lot of talk at the moment in sustainability and marketing communities about brands and behaviour change around sustainability. You know, there's the work been done by Havas around meaningful brands. Jim Stiegel's, the ex-P&G brand guru, has been talking a lot about the higher purpose of brands and marketing, and obviously Unilever's doing a lot around actually how can we drive change within our consumers, because they know that that's where the biggest impact is from their perspective on sustainability. I think it's 68% of their overall impact comes in the use phase of products. So regardless of what they do on the footprint side, if they don't tackle that, they're not really going to be getting themselves and society and environment as a whole into a more sustainable place. A lot of the talk at the moment is at quite a strategic level, and it's really important, you know, things around trust, reputation, and how we reduce a product's impact in its use phase. At Futerra, we believe that's really interesting and really important discussions, conversations, and work going on there, but actually, if you really want to get under the skin of how brands can drive behaviour change, you've got to get under the skin of brands themselves, looking at, you know, what they are and how they work. And we've really got to take it down to a practical level, because, you know, there's a lot of, another area of talk is around something in the States called the value action gap, and something that a company called the Cooperative over here in the UK found a little while ago, and they called it the 33 rule, where 30% of people, if you ask them, say they'll pay more for a more sustainable product, but actually when you get down to it, only 3% of them do. So how do you get them to act? And the one thing we can be certain of in that context, the answers certainly don't lie in any sense of rationality, rational behaviours, and the notion of the rational man. And these are the reasons why we started the Planet Brand work, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. But before we jump into that, let me give you a little bit of background about me. It's only polite that I do so. I've been working in sustainability for all of my career, starting out a business in the community, which is very similar to BSR over there in the States, looking at the footprint side of things. And then I got more interested in marketing, and since then I've been working at Futerra for probably about 8 years now, and working with big brands and big businesses and NGOs to try and work out how we can drive behaviour change, how you can better communicate sustainability to affect change. And that's really at the heart of what Futerra does, is how the hell are we going to change things? And that's the idea that drives us, making sustainable development so desirable it becomes normal. So let's start talking about planet brands. And it's always useful to have a framework to kind of frame our thinking, and obviously the context of sustainability is probably quite important at this one, so let's start there. So if you look at the sustainability impact of a business and a brand, this is what it looks like. On the left-hand side, you're probably familiar with the footprint side of things, a very rational space by metrics, very measurable, very defined, and over the last sort of 20 to 30 years that the sustainability community and people have been working on the footprint side of things, there have been some amazing changes. I don't think a day goes by now without an announcement of a business and organisation delivering serious reduction in their impact, whether it's energy, waste, developing new ways to actually go about using resources. So there's a lot of work that's been gone on there, all in this rational space. When you start to look kind of downstream towards the consumer, you get into this brain print idea. Now, brain print is relatively new and unexplored territory, and it was a phrase first coined by WWF, I think probably about 4 years ago now, and it's, well, as it says, it's the direct impact on the way people think about society and the environment. And it's by looking at the evidence of how brands and communications work to affect change that we can start to develop this model, and we can start to then use it and think about, well, what's the impact of our brand and our business? And so when you start to think about how, and start to look into the evidence of how brands work, you realise very quickly that it certainly isn't conscious. While when we think about brands consciously, we'll think about the tangible benefits that we get from interacting with that brand, from using its products, or from just being associated with it, from what the brand stands for. We get all that stuff, but it's the unconscious that's the really interesting side of things, the subconscious. We couldn't possibly process all the information required to make the decisions that we do on a daily basis. You go into the supermarket, you're looking for coffee, there's a lot of coffee on display. Me personally, I'll look for the Fair Trade logo, that'll cut down my choices very quickly. Then I'll look at the balance of quality and price and very quickly make a decision. I certainly couldn't do that if I was really thinking about all the different, if I was weighing up all the different price points and all the different values that go into that decision. I use symbols and shortcuts to help me. And those shortcuts are really important, and that's what a brand is effectively, a shortcut. Because when we experience something, the feelings that are created from that experience are imprinted in our brains. It's not quite remembering, because remembering feels like a very conscious act. It's subconscious, and it's this work comes out of neuroscience and some of the work coming out of really interesting psychologists and psychiatrists, people like Antonio Damasio. And what he's found is that there are these things called somatic markers that we create in our brains, and they're attached to stimulus. So when we see stimulus, and if we interact with it, we get an experience, we feel good or bad, certain emotions are created, and those emotions are imprinted in our brains. And when we see that stimulus or situation again, the markers effectively remind us subconsciously about what we felt the last time we experienced it, and we bring all those kind of emotions and experiences back to the new situation. It's how we learn, and it's been kind of the process of how we've learned through from when we were way back when living in caves. So that's some of the background and the theory that kind of underpins this model, and there's so much more of it that you can go and have a look at. But let's start talking about the model in detail. So right in the middle is the person, is you, and your impact can come from the products you use, the product use phase. So the amount of energy that it takes to heat the water that you use to wash your clothes in the washing machine. But it also comes from the experience, on the brain print side of things, what you experience, what you feel when you're using that product. Does it feel great? Is it making you feel happy? Is it making you feel up? Is it making you feel good? Or is it not? And that sort of personal level is where brands operate operates a lot. And that's the brand connection. Brands that create strong, positive, enjoyable, and emotional experience are very successful. So if you take the classic example of Apple versus Microsoft versus Dell versus HP, put all those guys together, when you experience an Apple product again and again and again, you have this good feeling because it's beautiful to look at, it's really easy to use, It's a very positive experience, and that's one of the things that creates fans, and Apple's certainly got a lot of those. When we think about the next layer out, this is the status layer, and this asks the question: what does using a brand say about you to the outside world? Does it give you a social benefit, either in the form of social currency, in terms of the stories you can tell, new knowledge you've got, insight, wisdom, experiences, even images to share. You share with your friends and people who are important to you, and people who, for you, looking and feeling high status is very important. Or actually, is it the status that you can present to the outside world, to talk about who you are and how successful you are, because you're driving that car, because you're wearing those kind of clothes. That's really important, because we are social animals, and that status layer is where people tend to think that a lot of the brand benefits come from. But actually it's across all three. So a really good example of status in action, if you think about electric cars, way before the Prius was famous, they were never really desirable, attractive things to look at. I mean, apart from the Tesla, I'd still argue they're probably not that attractive. But it wasn't until George Clooney, Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio got on the scene and started driving them in public that they suddenly became desirable status symbols of people who, cared about their impact, who wanted to be seen as being green. And they're still some of the biggest, I think they probably are the biggest selling electric vehicle out there. And they're certainly not the cheapest. From a rational perspective, you look at the impact of a Prius versus other cars, and it's relatively high, but it's the status that it gives the driver. It's what it says about you to the world, the associations that you get from that that's really important. That's a big driver around that product success. And so finally, you get out to this kind of the social norm layer. This is the furthest away from the individual. And this is the kind of the deeper subconscious cues, the meta-narratives of society, the things that society deems to be normal, social norms. And this is where the authority and comms budgets of brands come into play. It was in 2011, there was $498 billion spent on advertising worldwide. $498 billion. That's massive. That's going to have an effect on the way people think, without a doubt. So a good example to think of here is what society, Western Anglo-Saxon society holds up as the classic image of beauty. Kind of very slim, curvy, predominantly white, blonde-haired, white teeth, symmetrical face, all that, blue eyes. That's the traditional image of beauty, or the accepted image of beauty that you see everywhere. You can't really point to one source that's reinforcing it, because it's everywhere. It's in the newspapers you pick up, it's on pictures on the newsstand, the ads on the TV, the web banners as you're browsing the internet. But we know as individuals that there isn't one clear definition of beauty. Homogeneity isn't beautiful in itself, actually. We all have our own tastes and quirks shaped by our own genetics, our upbringing, our experience, our aspirations, and we decide for ourselves what we think is beautiful, but there is this reinforcing image out there that keeps getting pushed down to us, and that's the social norm space, and that's really interesting, and that's a really kind of unexplored space, and one that actually brands have a huge potential to work on, and it's not that difficult, as we'll see later. So these three layers on the brainprint side all interact, all interrelate. They're just set out as there, so it's a bit easier to understand. So now I have a question for you all. So if you're a brand, which brainprint area do you think should be the biggest priority for brands? Is it experience, the close piece right by the individual? Is it status? Or is it the social norm side of things?
And so for everyone who's on the line, you can click on your screen to cast your vote. If you have a few people in the room with you, maybe discuss amongst yourselves. We'll give you a few seconds to decide on your answer, and then we'll close and show the results of that. So again, looking at which brainprint area that Dave was just discussing, do you think should be the biggest priority? Is it the experiential level, about creating status among their users, or creating new social norms? So we're going to give you 5 more seconds, and then I'll close the poll. And here we go. I'm going to close that and share the results with you. And Dave, are you able to see that on your screen?
I'm not, no.
Okay, so the results came back. 61% said experience should be the biggest priority. 3% said status, and 36% said social norms.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Very high on the experience level.
Yeah. I guess that's because it's quite, well, in one sense, it's quite a controlled, something brands can control. You'd expect them to be able to control fairly easily, but that's, that's very interesting. I was expecting status to be a lot higher, given the social animals that we are, and the rise of Facebook and all the rest of it's kind of testament to that. Okay, very interesting, cool. Well, I'll move on in the need of time. So let me just get this thing working again. Okay, Planet Brands. So this is, you've now got a context, a framework within which to kind of analyse and to think about the impacts of brands on us, on society. What I want to talk to you now about is Planet Brands. So we set out to find 100 brands that could all help us live more sustainable lifestyles. The brands that change the behaviour of billions for a better future. And it's about scale is one of the really important things here, because no matter how much work is done on the footprint side of things from a business, or from businesses, or from every business, unless we can change the behaviour of people out there consuming things, using things, experiencing things, then all the footprint side of things isn't going to pay off. We really need to drive consumer behaviour change. So that was the kind of underlying idea at the heart of Planet Brands. So what we didn't do, though, was look for the ones that are most sustainable at the moment. We set out to find the brands that could change the world. So this is forward-looking. This isn't a review of the last year's sustainability indices and brand value indices put together and say, well, look, this is the biggest brand that also has the highest sustainability score. This is forward-looking. So we did that by looking at 3 factors. Brand value, which shows the influence that brands have, the ones that are the most recognised, that can command the most loyalty. And this is because the world's most familiar brands are, well, likely to be the world's best channels to make sustainable behaviours normal. We looked at global scale, which is, well, the brands that can reach out to the most people, the brands that can affect radical behaviour change, which, in billions of people, not just a couple of thousand, not just a couple of 100,000, not just a couple of million, but billions. Because they do that every day. There was a designer in the US, Tanner, and I forget his surname, but he once counted the number of interactions he had with the brand, anything from walking past and seeing the branding, anything from sipping the coffee, all his daily experience, and he counted it 1,035 times. 1,035 impressions of interactions. That's incredible on a daily basis. So even if you're skeptical about brands' ability to influence behaviour, from a subconscious, conscious perspective, the sheer frequency of interactions incredibly powerful. Anyway, I digress. So, and then we also looked at sustainability. Now, brands that are going to drive behaviour change on sustainability have to know something about sustainability. They have to have started on their journey. This doesn't mean they need to be amazing at it, but they really need to understand it, because, well, people aren't going to trust them otherwise, are they? Brands have to be doing something in order to be able to ask something or to involve other people. So the sources we used to work out our indices and to develop the top 100 was looking at Millward's brands indices of 2011, the Interbrands Best Global Brands 2011, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Newsweek's Green Rankings, the Carbon Disclosure Project, and all sorts of publicly available company reports. We looked at which brands operate in the most countries. We put all this data together, and one of our very clever analysts developed an algorithm to work through, and we worked out a couple of behaviour change factors as well, and then from that we pulled out the top 100. Now, they're not ranked in terms of this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. That's way too difficult to do. And the point of this was to provoke and say that these are the brands that really could drive change. I'll be quite blunt about it. Most of the brands named on our index haven't really started doing behaviour change with their consumers yet. Some are quite controversial, and some kind of have big struggles with sustainability, big dilemmas that they're still trying to solve. But they all have a huge asset. They're all a huge asset for sustainability if they choose to use the power of their brand. So let's have a look at the full list. So this is 100, the top 100. Unsurprisingly, American brands dominate. They're about half the list. German and Japanese brands are kind of up there, some of the largest contenders, and there's obviously some Chinese brands up on there, Bank of China, China Mobile, coming up quite strongly. So that's the sort of relatively unsurprising piece. The surprising piece is actually, remember this is an index about potential, not necessarily performance. There's the established sustainability leaders on there. You've got IBM, HP, UPS, those kind of guys. People have set out some quite ambitious targets recently, PPPRs, Gucci, you've got Adidas in there, but many brands that score highly, those that are either at the start of their sustainability journey or the ones that have sat at the heart of many a controversial debate, like Apple, Ferrari, McDonald's, and you'll note that you see brands on here, not companies. So the index uses data on globally recognised brands. So that's why brands like Kleenex are up there, rather than the owner Kimberly-Clark, and that's why Unilever aren't up here, because they have lots of brands, but as a brand themselves, as a business they're leading on sustainability, but as a brand they're relatively unknown, and they don't feature in the brand indices that we use as sources. So being named on this index, being one of those 100 brands, isn't an award. It's not a mark of achievement. It's a call to action. It's a call to action to say, these brands have the potential to, save the world if they use their power in the right way. So that's why we created it. But alongside doing that, we also looked at hundreds of examples of brand-led behaviour change, all the things we could find that are out there. We looked at what works and why, and through this we created a very simple framework that brands can use to get started on behaviour change, that we're calling the 3 Ps of behavioural marketing for sustainability. Now, this is a very simple framework, and it's simple for one very obvious reason, which is this is a really complex area, so it needs to be broken down and simple, and it maps broadly to the sort of 3 layers of brain print. You've got product, persuasion, and placement. Product is all about how you can create a product or service where sustainable behaviours are designed in and where unsustainable behaviours are designed out. Persuasion is about how you persuade and influence people to change their behaviour. And placement is all about how you can change the associations around sustainability and how you can make sustainable behaviours normal through communication. Now, brand activity will very rarely focus solely on one of those. Normally involve a couple, if not all 3, working together, but we've broken it out for the sake of understanding. And now you notice on the right-hand side, there are a couple of factors that are really important for a brand when they're thinking about what they can do and where to focus. To make the most of their potential, they've really got to think quite hard about the personality that they've got, the audience, the relationship that they've got with their audience, and just think about those material issues, the things that are relevant to the brand, and from there you'll get the behaviour. So let's move on to look at the Ps in more detail. So product level. So we've got 4 examples up here, and this isn't the full spectrum of things you can do under product to design behaviour change in or to design unsustainable behaviours out, but they'll give you a taste for it. So on the left we've got replenish. So this is a concentrate liquid, concentrate kind of household cleaning liquid. There's nothing really new there. It's a product reformulation that happened a while ago. But what companies and brands found was that people didn't really believe that a very small amount of liquid could have the same impact and effect and results as what they used to have, which would be like a litre bowl of liquid. Instead, you've got kind of 100 millilitres there. So what they did was, well, they just used more. It says use a teaspoon, I'm going to use a tablespoon. They didn't believe it. So what Replenish did was design that unsustainable behaviour out. And we're going to stop you from actually using whatever you want from this concentrate. We're going to create a product that stops you doing that. So you put your capsule in, mix it with water, and it releases the right amount of concentrate into the water, and you're good to go. And the consumer doesn't even have to think about it. And I'm sure those of you that study business will recognise the kind of Gillette razor model, where you've got the razor, or in this case the bottle, and because you've got that specific type of product, you're almost locked into that relationship with the company and the brand, so you're going to keep buying their refills, provided the experience is great and the product works really well. So there's a way there to start to move it into a more of a longer-term relationship with customers. You can look at enabling new behaviours, not just designing them out. So Tide cold water is a classic example. So before P&G worked hard to reformulate this product so it would work at cold temperatures, you couldn't wash your clothes well at cold temperatures because the product you had wouldn't be as effective. So they redesigned it, and they've enabled new behaviour by redesigning it, by reformulating the product. And there's a lot of activity going on around that sort of sector at the moment, particularly in terms of health and food. The next one, some of you may notice, it was quite new to me. I don't have long hair. This is a can of Baptiste dry shampoo. So it's a whole new product category. It's not marketed on sustainability, of the fact it means you don't have to use water, you don't have to use energy to heat the water, etc., to wash your hair. It's marketed on time savings, and it's been a really successful product. Now, what this means, though, is an interesting one to think about. So it's got a lot of sustainability value in there locked up that you could say is not being capitalised on because it's not directly relevant to their consumer base. But what it does mean, though, is as the context continues to change, as sustainability issues actually continue to be more important, you've got some discovery points built in there to use later. So you could go back to your audience at some point when they start to ask questions about water use, and that starts to become more prevalent in everyday conversations or in the media, and then be saying, well, look, all the people who have been using this for the last couple of years, you guys have all been having a really positive impact. Feel good. And that's going to create a stronger connection to the brand, because people will feel good. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you've got MasterCard. Now, this is an example of collaboration. So MasterCard, this is MasterCard in Russia, and they teamed up with an anti-corruption charity over there, so that you spend some money on your MasterCard, and 1% or whatever it is donated straight to this anti-corruption charity. Now, that collaboration has effectively created a link that wouldn't otherwise be there. It's highly unlikely that a lot of people would go about and actually give a percentage of money to an anti-corruption charity, but if they have that kind of sense of, yeah, I want to do that, and the marketing hits them at the right time, they sign up for the card, they get the card, they don't have to think about doing that again. They just pull the card out, use it, and every time they do that, they'll be reminded that they're having a positive impact. And again, that's a really good feeling that's created there. Now, interestingly, on this type of collaborative approach, you've got to make sure that there's a functional fit between the brand and the partner, because that's where you get the most brand effect, as it's called. So there's been a lot of studies done into Formula One sponsorship, motorsport sponsorship, and they've found that the biggest brand effect in terms of loyalty, of positive association, of positive thoughts around a brand comes from where there's a really clear functional fit. So things like oil or automotive parts and brands attached to a Formula One team is much stronger than cigarettes. But the reason why cigarettes advertise on them is because they can't advertise anywhere else. So the functional fit's really important when you get at a collaborative approach. So that's product, and as I said, there's lots more different nuances, subtleties around how you can think about designing a product that either builds behaviour change in or removes unsustainable behaviour change. The next P is persuasion. Now, this is the world of behavioural economics, of social marketing, of broad marketing in general, and there's a lot of different tactics, tools, tips, pitfalls to be mindful of here. And I can only talk about some of them here, but there's a lot more out there. So on the left-hand side, you've got an energy meter. Now, this is an example of providing information or providing feedback to the individual in order to persuade them to change. So this persuasion piece works by, letting people know whether their behaviour is good or bad. Effectively, you're using a lot of energy in your home when you don't necessarily need to. That's a kind of informational level, a very rational level, and the various studies have proved that's effective. But it's actually more effective when you build an emotion element in there. And as you'll notice on that, if you look close enough, there's a little house with a smiley face. And obviously, if your energy consumption is too high, based on normal, which is based on very complicated calculations, then it turns into a sad face. And that, as a piece of communication, has proven to be very effective. So you can provide feedback, both informational and also emotional. Now, the Prius is up there because, as I mentioned earlier, to talk about messengers and the power of a messenger for a specific audience. And we've already talked about that one, so I won't talk about it anymore. But when you are thinking about that, you've really got to be clear about who the messenger is, what associations they have with their brand, and also what their relationship is with an audience group, and whether that works for your audience or not. Is the messenger seen as a role model? Underneath the Prius, you've got one of their competitors, and that's the Nissan Leaf, and in the background is Tower Bridge in London. Now, electric cars suffer from something called range anxiety. People are reluctant to buy them because they're worried that, a couple of times a year when they want to go into a long drive, the car's going to run out of electricity and they're going to be stranded. Now, all the evidence shows that that's kind of, that's highly unlikely to happen. The technology's got really good, and also, the requirements of the user are actually quite small, but you don't really think about it. So what they did was employ a tactic that we call try before you buy, which they just got a fleet of Nissan Leafs and used them as taxis in London. So people get in and be like, oh, it's an electric car, that's interesting. Oh, it's all very high tech. Oh, it's really kind of smooth ride. It's really quiet. And for the energy, for the charge that they used was the charge for the charge. It took to charge the car for that journey, the use of the electricity, and that was really small. So people got in there, they experienced something that was really positive, and they realised the cost just from experiencing it. I mean, a car's quite an expensive purchase, so more people would do that, but actually the issues around range anxiety and others are quite strong, so people don't even get to factoring electric cars into their choices. The next one along is Coca-Cola's Recycling King campaign. Now this is a kind of more of a classic marketing campaign when you think about persuasion, and how brands can persuade people. This sort of fits that bill quite well. And so this was run in Israel, and the challenge was, who's going to be Israel's recycling king, and the way they worked that out, so competitive, used a competitive element, was people taking photos of themselves recycling. And they tagged the photos, they stuck them on Facebook, shared them with their friends. They also tagged the source of where the bin was, GPS, so you're creating a map of where to recycle in Israel. And you're using social proof because you've got one of your mates has done it and stuck it up and said, yeah, I'm doing this, come on, I'm going to be the recycle king, you're going to compete with them. There's a lot of kind of tactics in there that really do play both on status, on peer pressure, on making things visible, on providing information in terms of where to recycle, and a competitive element in there. And obviously it's linked to a very, very material issue for Coca-Cola, which is recycling. So There's a nice example there, more of a traditional one you'd expect. The next one along is really interesting, and it acts the deodorant and shower gel brand from Unilever. Now, think what you will about Axe and the kind of the way it uses sex to sell its products, but it has been an incredibly successful brand in the category in its category. Since launch, it's been phenomenally successful. There were cases over here in the UK where teachers were kind of getting in contact with the press and getting in contact with the company because teenagers were spraying way too much of it on themselves, so much so that it was disrupting class. So as a tactic that it's used to reach its specific audience group, it's very effective. And you can see that tactic in this very, very, very simple print ad around shower pooling, as they're calling it, or saving water by sharing a shower. Now, likelihood of that actually driving behaviour change, so you see X number of people kind of sharing showers, let's be honest, it's quite slim. But what it does do is show how a brand personality can enter an issue and create a connection to an audience that really otherwise wouldn't give a toss about it. Teenage boys, unlikely to care about saving water, but make it about being desirable, make it a bit of fun, and you've opened an issue up in those guys' minds that would otherwise have been closed. So that's the power of a brand bringing their personality to reach an audience that otherwise couldn't be reached. And there's some that's a really interesting aspect for brands. Let's move on, I'm aware of time. So this is placement, the one that 31% of you said was really important for brands to focus on. Now, placement's about how you change the associations around sustainability and make sustainable behaviours normal in your communications. So you can do behavioural placement or sort of associational placement. Behavioural placement is not actually that new. It's something that a term that NBC coined back in 2007, and they used it to describe their Green Week programming that they did. So what they did was weave sustainability into the storylines of mainstream entertainment. So things like the detectives on Law and Order would tackle a sort of cash for clunkers scam. You'd see people in various sitcoms kind of recycling things rather than just chucking them in the bin. And what this whole section of placement relies on is this sort of peripheral rather than central processing. That kind of normalisation just from experiencing something again and again and again, and not really paying much attention to it, because brands work because you absorb you absorb everything you see around you. Your brain absorbs it. You only consciously process a very small amount of information, and so a lot of stuff kind of gets in under the radar. That's why if someone something about that brand, but it's there because you've absorbed it, in the same way that the vast majority of individual communication is through body language, not through actually what is said. That's just one of those things, the way brains work. So, and it goes for symbolic placement as well. So, particularly in car ads, there seems to be a lot more use of wind turbines. You see bikes used a lot more in adverts, bicycles. Again, helping to normalise the idea that that cycling is normal, and not something that you have to do dressed up in lycra. A really nice example of this actually is the P&G Mums campaign that was run kind of in the build-up to the Olympics. And what it's a really beautiful story, and it shows families from around the world, the mum and the kid, the mum taking the little kid to the gym, to the track, to the pool, getting up really early, working hard to make sure their kid could get there. And in it you see a lot of public transport from different cities around the world, and it does a really good job of, just making that seem normal. There are a few car journeys in there. And then obviously the climax of it is the child has grown into an adult, is at the Olympics, has won, and kind of, says to mum, thank you, in a very emotional way. It's really good. It can be quite overt though, I think, and this is where you get the blurs between persuasion and placement. So the one in the bottom left, Meet the Superhumans, was a campaign run by Channel 4, a broadcaster over here in the UK, who had the rights for the Paralympics. If you want to see something quite powerful, go and have a look at that on YouTube. But what it is it's very overt. It's not saying that Paralympians are second fiddle to the Olympics. It's not saying they're disabled. It's flipping it around and just saying, we're superhuman. They're super enabled. And it's just a really nice flip that completely changes the associations in your brain at a more conscious level around disability and ability. Okay. So, a question for you guys now. I've worked through that. Which P do you think should be the biggest priority for brands? Product persuasion or placement?
So again, everyone who's on the line, you can click right onto your screen to vote for your selection about which P you think should be the biggest priority for brands today. Again, we talked about product innovation, about using kind of the behavioral persuasion, and also placement and sort of some of those social norms that you're creating with your brand. We have about 10 minutes left of Dave's presentation, and I just want to remind everyone that you can submit questions to the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And I know that Dave has a lot more to share with us, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll so that we can see the results.
Well, sorry, Casey. I really like this stuff. Okay, cool. I can't see the results. Are you able to see the results? Okay.
No,
so I'm not. I'm sure I'm doing.
So we have 42% said product, another 42% said persuasion, and 17% said placement.
Interesting. See how it maps across back to the previous answer, previous set of answers. Okay, cool. In the again, with time ticking away, I'll press on, and the next bit's relatively quick as there's complexity around it. So this is about, well, okay, so that's giving you some thinking around a framework for thinking about brands and their impact, provocation around, well, which brands could change behaviour at global scale. We've looked at how brands can actually get stuck into doing behavioural change. But let's kind of step back a level now and think, well, how do you actually get it into your brand in the first place? Because a brand could try and change behaviour, but unless it's really part of what the brand's about, then you're not going to get the benefits from a brand perspective. So this is where it's kind of more about working out, setting the foundations in place to capture the value for the brand while driving sustainability change. 5 steps, really simple, and I'll go through this quickly so that we can have good questions. First off, you've got to feel inspired. You've got to work out why sustainability is relevant for your brand as opposed to your competitor who may have the same, work in the same product category, target the same audience, have a very similar production process or value chain. What is it that makes you unique to them? And that tends to be your brand. And therefore, you really need to think about your brand in the context of sustainability to work out how you can make it relevant to you. So here are some of the leaders on sustainability, you could say. So, and what they've all done is sort of picked an issue to focus on. So you've got Puma with their environment and P&L, looking at accountability, accounting for sustainability. IBM, Smarter Planet, Vision of a Sustainable Future. Unilever with the decoupling and behavioural change. You've got Walmart going for scale. GE with the green revenue side of things. Body Shop focusing on campaigns. Toyota with the product transformation, and M&S, Marks and Spencer's, a supermarket in the UK here, focus very much on choice editing, so removing unsustainable choices from their shops and their stores, and going down that kind of we're the trusted retailer route. So it's really important to work out what that sweet spot is, what your brands can be famous for effectively, and you do that by working out why it's relevant to you in the first place. And that should involve actually lots of conversations with as many people as you can in the business to really get under the skin of what it is that makes them tick, and therefore what's going to inspire them to get on with it. The next bit is then integrating it. How do you make it part of business as usual? And this is where you get into the strategy side of things. So how do we embed sustainability in our business strategy? How do we let's get it into the sort of performance review side of things. Let's make it part of people's what it what it means to be successful in this company. Let's embed it in our strategies and our decision-making processes. This is an example of a piece of creative we did for a company called Axel & Bell, who own chemicals and various paint businesses. And their thing is about tomorrow's questions, today's answers. And so we posed them a series of questions as a bit of a teaser to get them to really think about this and to get them to think about sustainability in a different way before moving into a kind of more of an engagement phase. And so once you've worked out why it's relevant to you as a brand, what's unique about it, sustainability for you, you've worked out how you're going to integrate it into your business, you've asked the right questions of your strategy, of the way you work, of what motivates people to work out how to get sustainability in there, you've then got to make it happen. What can you do on a day-to-day basis? And this is about where you start to bring it alive internally. So for a company called Nando's, which are a chicken restaurant over here in the UK, also in South Africa, have I think 9 or 10 branches in the US. For them, what it's about, why it's relevant to them, is doing the right thing. That's what sustainability means to them. That came from their language. When we were out with them, we went and talked to pretty much everyone in the UK business, all the people working in restaurants and the senior management and the corporate level, and the language that came back was this: well, it's just about doing the right thing for us. So we use that, and we do a series of activities, every month to try to keep it alive. The restaurants are recognised in terms of success by, the sustainability metrics are part of that measure of success. The image on the right represents a film we did, Nando's Investigates, where we get a couple of the guys and girls who work in the restaurant to go and investigate an issue, something they're part of, but they may not know what happens behind the scenes. What happens when you separate out your waste and you stick it in the recycling bin? Where does it go? Why should we bother doing it? Why is it important? Get them to ask the questions, to get them to answer it, and it becomes much more powerful within an organisation because it's people who talk the same language as them, people with the same similar viewpoints, and they ask the right questions to make it relevant to everyone else. So that's how you can, some ideas around how you can start to implement it. And this is something we did for Sony around their ideas progress through imagination, and that's how they think about sustainability. And so we did a series of kind of games and the idea of play, and brought that right up to the fore in terms of how you can act on sustainability. And so once you've got an organisation that's worked out why sustainability is relevant to it, it's found its sweet spot, it's got it in its business strategy, it's got people doing it and taking action every day, you then want to involve other people. So how can we take responsibility? And that's about responsibility for the business in terms of the people outside. It's how do you involve stakeholders? How do you ask people the right questions to get the right answers that's going to help you continue your sustainability journey in a way that's going to benefit your key stakeholders as much as your internal stakeholders. And this is an example of a series of research surveys we did, and then produced a report for a supermarket over here called Asda, who are owned by Walmart. And we talked to their whole, thousands of their customers and called them everyday experts, so that they gave us a really good insight and a fresh insight actually, because these aren't the kind of people that traditionally can afford sustainability. But it was fantastic to get their insights in terms of what's important and then enable the business to respond. And then finally, you've got to innovate. So, you by this point, you're at a point where you're doing it. You know why it's relevant. People in the business are doing it. You're talking to your stakeholders. You get a sense of what's important to them, and you're responding to that. But, let's leverage some real value out of this. And that is when you get into the 3 Ps again. The external piece, the marketing side of things. Very quick whip through the 5 steps. And so, final poll question. Where are you guys on these? Where's your business currently? Is it sort of at that inspire stage? Is it working out why it's relevant? Is it kind of integrating it with the business strategy? Is it implementing it, getting people excited, getting them doing things? Is it involving stakeholders? Or is it really innovating and really driving things forward? Now, ideally, a brand would do those things sequentially, or a business would do those things sequentially. In the real world, things very rarely work like that, do they? So people start at different elements, people start working on specific areas, but really kind of where's all your energy focused at the moment?
All right, we're going to give you about 5 more seconds to submit your answer by clicking on the screen, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and show us the results. All right, so it looks like we have 26% say that they are in the inspire phase. Another 26% are at integrate. 17% are at implement. 9% are at involve. And 22% are at innovate.
Oh, that's brilliant. Because the innovation space is really exciting and a good way to drive change in the outside world. And yeah, it's really refreshing to hear a lot of people working on that inspire stage, because that's the bit that I think until fairly recently hasn't really been recognised as being that important. You know, asking that why question, why is this relevant to us, really does unlock a lot. So it's good to hear a good chunk of people working in that space. Okay, that's me. Thank you. So a lot of the stuff you saw in there was thinking that we're developing and sort of putting together to release a guide around how brands can drive behaviour change. So if you are interested in getting your hands on that, please do follow us on Twitter. You got the handle down there at Futerra, and you know, alongside many other things, we'll keep you abreast of the development on that and when it's going to be launched.
Great, and for everyone on the line, Dave has also offered to send everyone who signed up for this webinar kind of the next phase of this study that they did, which will include a Planet Brand guide. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes, yes.
So he's in the process of finishing that up and has offered to send everyone on the line that directly. So you can expect to hear from him in the near future. So we only have a few minutes here, but I want to get to as many questions as I can. So again, just for everyone on the line, you can ask questions in 2 different ways. You can ask us through the question box or via Twitter. So the first question we have, Dave, is really about, you know, when you get started, you know, you kind of brought us through this phase or these phases that we hopefully follow in sequential order, which is inspire, integrate, implement, involve, and innovate. But when you're getting started, should you be starting by asking yourself or your business questions about strengths or weaknesses when it comes to sustainability? Should I be looking first to things that we're not doing well right now, or should I be looking to things that might differentiate my brand?
Very good question. Obviously you've got to look at both. You've got to know your weaknesses, and you say you've got plans for dealing with them and you're acting on them. But if you don't know your strengths, you know, you're not sure what to put forward. But all that, strengths and weaknesses, only become relevant in the context of what are the key issues on your business. You know, for us as a comms agency, our strengths and weaknesses, you could say, you know, at the moment we don't do any composting. That's you know, that could be a weakness, but actually, given the relative impact of our business, the impact of our business in the work we do, the composting side of things is relative, you know, is irrelevant in that when you think about it in that way. So thinking about it from the material issues and saying, well, like, where's our biggest impact? What are the biggest challenges for our business and for our industry? And then think about that will help. Then you work out what is the strength and what is the weakness.
That's great. Another question that came through is really about how can a brand get to know what consumers are sensitive to in terms of sustainability. So specifically looking at your customer base and whether they're interested in something that's more to do with social or something that's more to do with environmental. How do we get to know that?
Yeah, there's lots of surveys and things out there. Depends how big the business. You can ask them directly, survey them, or you could, that could cost quite a lot of money, or you could just do that in a relatively low cost way and just get out there and talk to them, or approach them on social media, which is incredibly low cost. Obviously, there's you do close down the representativeness of your sample, because the people that use social media actively, etc., will close down that focus. But the key thing to do is ask them. I mean, it's really important you do work out what their concerns are, because if you start to map their concerns and then you map your material issues and the things that your business is acting on, the kind of, think of a Venn diagram of those two bubbles, put it together, and you've got, you know, a sweet spot there of what's relevant to the customer and what you're doing, and that can give you some focus from a strategic perspective.
Great. One more question for you. A lot of the examples that we saw were really about providing people access. So kind of opening the doors and making it really easy to make the right choice. And that's kind of the whole idea behind this behavior change, and, you know, brands really being the ones that drive it. So do you, this is sort of a broad question, but do you have any advice about, you know, getting people to do things, you know, like recycling, which was some of the examples we talked about. And, you know, in our world, we also think about volunteering, about getting people out there, getting them access. Do you think technology and innovation are really kind of the keys to those things, or do you think there's also kind of low-tech ways as well?
Well, I think it depends who the audience are and what their normal channels and ways of interacting are. So if you've got a business that has office staff and also people are out doing deliveries and driving vans, the mechanisms for engaging those two audiences are very different. So you've got to tailor it quite well. But I think when you get into things like volunteering, which have a really strong social element, which can be very emotive, then a face-to-face conversation is going to be way more powerful than you know, anything screen-based, because you can create a much stronger kind of emotional connection and commitment in that interaction. So yeah, definitely, I think, you know, low-tech ways are really important, really powerful in order to create the connection and to sort of secure commitment. But once you're kind of, you know, once you've got those things, then you can use social media and technology to remind, to amplify, to celebrate, to inspire. So you know, I think it's not a question of either or. It's sort of think about how they can all work together in a way that makes people feel brilliant and gets them excited.
Great, that's great advice. We're just about out of time today, so thanks to everyone for all your questions and for dialing in. I know we're probably missing some of our East Coast people who are without electricity, unfortunately, but luckily we've recorded the session today. To stay up to date about upcoming sessions, there's a few ways you can do so. We have our blog, Volunteering is CSR, where we always post announcements about upcoming sessions. You can also follow us on Twitter, that's at @VM_solutions. And then finally, we have a corporate newsletter called Good Companies that you can sign up for on the sidebar of our blog. And just to give everyone a heads up, you can register for our November event, which is all about organizing days of service or weeks of service or months of service. We're going to have two people on the line, David Levinson, who runs the nonprofit organization Big Sunday, which runs large-scale days of service. And then we're also going to have one of our clients, Vicky Karianis from FedEx, who has been implementing the company's employee week of service, FedEx Cares. And so she's going to talk a little bit about the best practices and key lessons learned when trying to implement those. So you can register for those, and we'll also send you reminders, and you can also check us out on those other channels. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today and giving us this sneak peek in kind of our simple steps to, you know, encouraging more sustainable behaviors among our consumers and audiences. So thanks to you, Dave, and thanks to everyone for listening in.
No problem. Thank you.